Now, I don't know how you're all coping there, whether you've all nodded off during my long ramblings. My colleagues here are kindly still awake, but I am very aware of boring them to death. I was going to give you a whole sort of narrative account of the China story from the 1840s to now and how it's staged and seen and so on and so forth, but I think that'll be a bit too dull. Instead, I'll just pick on a couple of things, again, related quite directly to Xi Jinping's era. And tomorrow I said I'll be talking a bit more about foreign affairs and the larger context of things. But a couple of things happened. So I've mentioned the timescapes, the revitalization of the Chinese nation. This is a concept and a term that first developed in the late 19th century, was promoted during the early years of the Republic of China, which was established in 1912. This is not new. And one of the things, the strengths of people like Xi Jinping, and it's not Xi Jinping, it's Xi Jinping Deng, etc. It's his advisors, his body of what in Chinese they call 御用文人, that is imperial advisors or in-house intellectuals. There's a whole body of people, mentioned earlier, who are trying to get their ideas into Xi Jinping's mouth. So there's this constant vying competition, and this is the same with any political environment. It's the same here in Australia, in America, in Italy, Germany. You have advisors who try and help you formulate ideas or help you articulate your ideas that you feel you relate to in a way that can be consumed and understood by people. So Xi Jinping has many smart advisors. And you'll notice, as we've seen Xi Jinping in power, you'll notice that ideas shift and change and move. China Dream. Xi Jinping mentions it in November 2012. Of course, you'll remember 2007 and 8. The theme of the Beijing Olympics was 同一世界,同一梦想, one world, one dream. I mean, it's not exactly new. 中国梦 was used, there's a wonderful volume of essays collected in 1933 on 中国梦, published by writers back in 1933. 南方周末, Southern Weekly, a Southern Weekend newspaper, every year for 10 years, has published an annual January special issue on 中国梦. So Xi Jinping gets into power 2012. China Dream is not exactly, to those of us who deal with China, it's not exactly a new concept. It's a bit shop-worn, a bit dull. Even Xi Jinping thinks so. Why do we know? Because in 2012 and 13, he and the academic and propaganda industries of China spend a large amount of money, or give away a large amount of money, for people to help the authorities formulate the meaning of the China Dream. You tell us what it is. So people have been writing advice papers and suggestions. There have been international symposia and fora and blah, blah, blah. Billions have been spent to try and work. So what did I really mean? I said the China Dream, I laid it out, but what do I really mean? Because, we need to refine. So that's what's been happening. Xi Jinping has been updating. It's also because Xi Jinping gets into power, he announces the leitmotif, the key element of his period of rule on the day he gets into power. Now, this is the first time, from my understanding, a communist leader has done so. Usually they wait 3 to 5 years. That's a decent interval until they actually reveal what their intellectual or theoretical formulation for their period of rule will be. Under Jiang Zemin, it was 三个代表, the 3 represents, which, again, look it up. It's rather dull, but not stupid. Deng Xiaoping is Deng Xiaoping 理论. What's that? Socialism of Chinese characteristics. Whatever I say it is. That's his theory. Mao Zedong 思想, developed by Liu Shaoqi in the 1940s. It has, again, you can look it up, there's 3 or 4 major elements to what Mao Zedong thought is. Hu Jintao, who ruled from 2003 until 2012, his line was so-called the scientific developmental model. 科学发展观, dull as dishwater, but not stupid. Xi Jinping comes up with his immediately and then backfill. In Australia, we call it backfilling. You come up with a concept and then you fill in the details later. Now, I would suggest to you all that as you're studying the One Belt, One Road, the 1B, 1R, that the Chinese authorities, as you've probably noticed, has been spending a large amount of money to try and work out, now what do we really mean? What is it? So we know what it is. Now you'll see tomorrow that I've given you links to major articles that describe exactly what the land routes and the sea routes of One Belt, One Road are, but what it means in terms of real trade routes, real trade, movement of ideas and people, what it means in terms of real investment infrastructure, what it means in terms of actually trying to get rid of Chinese goods on a lax international market so that China's economy continues to grow, that's part of the deal. But the authorities have been putting hundreds of millions of dollars into seminars, symposia, and workshops around the world to try and, one, promote the idea, but also to work out what the hell it means, and also to come up with some catchy, cute phrases that will help promote it. So this is what politics is. You come up with an idea, but then you need to have new angles and ways of promoting and articulating and packaging it time and time again. Anyway, Xi Jinping gets in about, we talk about his China dream, the 30 years, the 230 years, the two centenary ways of seeing the Chinese timescape. These things matter. I've talked about them at great length because framing ideas is important. Xi Jinping is the first leader since really Jiang Zemin, and in many ways Deng Xiaoping, who regards history and articulating history clearly and giving a narrative a cogence that of great importance. It's an important moment in party history for people like me who are historians. It's a wonderful thing, and I'm delighted that he's doing it, but it also helps frame all these other discussions. And one discussion I'll end this whole session with is the discussion about constitutionalism. Rather clumsy word. In Chinese, it's very simple. It's called 宪政. Write it up for those of you who know the word, or who don't know the word, but should know the word. 宪政. Xian. It literally means, 宪 is to contain, to bind, to have a format for something, to modulate, and that's politics, to practice power. So it means to practice power through a modulating or patterning device such as a constitution. So 宪法 is the word for constitution in Chinese, borrowed from Japanese, the original word being kimpo. Sensei, or gensei, is the Japanese term that was introduced to China in the 1880s, 90s. The Xianzheng debate, the debate about constitutionalism, why is it important? It means that political power is exercised within a legal framework. Now, China, of course, has a constitution. It's been written a number of times, rewritten a number of times. It's based on the Soviet Union's constitution of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. It contains in it a crucial article, Article number 1, which declares that the Constitution is ruled by the 4 cardinal principles. That is the leadership of the Communist Party, the Socialist Road, unified democratic people's dictatorship, and a 4th item I can never quite remember. Anyway, you test your Chinese friends and see if they can rattle off the 4 cardinal principles. I didn't write them down here today. Article 1 of the Chinese Constitution negates everything else in the Chinese Constitution. Just something for you to be aware of. 1989, student rebellion, we don't have time to go into it. One of the reasons 89 happened was that some people were trying to get rid of Article number 1 in the Chinese Constitution. Why? Because Mikhail Gorbachev in the Soviet Union had a few years earlier got rid of Article number 1 in the Soviet Constitution, which began a momentum towards radical and major political change and eventually political pluralism and democratic change. In China, the argument has gone back and forth. Anyway, Xianzheng, Xi Jinping gets into power, and there's many people hoping that, okay, he's a new leader, he's a younger leader, different from Hu Jintao, it's going to be a much more vibrant, interesting political environment. There's lots of hints that have been put out by supporters of Xi Jinping that this guy will introduce not only a new wave of economic reform, he'll have all these new narratives about where China's going now that China's a major world player. Maybe all the hopes of Chinese political reform, i.e. limiting the power of the Communist Party, giving greater rights to the rising consumer classes of China, the rising middle class, to Chinese basic rights, to the whole debate about political participation, because we're becoming a modern, globally recognized society. We travel the world. We're one of the most literate societies in the world, major consumer society. Why can't we determine our own local politics? Because after all, we're stakeholders in our society. We're landowners, we're property owners, we're consumers. We should have all the rights that come with bourgeois revolution and change. Wasn't this what the French Revolution was about? Wasn't this what the American Revolution and not paying taxes to the British? And isn't this what change is really about? Now, these types of debates about constitutionalism have actually been going on in China since the 1890s. And there have been various attempts to introduce 宪政, constitutional rule that limits autocracy and party power or the power of certain individuals for over 100 years. Xi gets into power. I said all these articles are coming out and people are debating and blah, blah, blah. It's great hope. And I mentioned earlier the South China weekend, Nanfang Zhoumo, its annual edition, January edition, always has a China Dream special. What is our dream for this year? What are we hoping for? It's the type of thing that newspapers do, sell copy. January 2013, Nanfang Zhoumo newspaper prepares to publish its New Year's edition, which is called The China Dream Constitutionalism. 中国梦, 宪政梦. And this leads to a huge explosion. Why? Because party leaders, and Xi Jinping is very reluctant to take action, but the party leaders know full well they're not planning any political reform. They're not planning to revise the constitution. They're not planning to carry out major change. I would point out that there are reasons people have hoped. Why? The 1970s, early 1980s, mid-1980s, late 1980s, over a 20-year period nearly, Deng Xiaoping and his colleagues had repeatedly promised that we will separate the party from the state. 党政, you're a 共产党和政府分开. So the party and the state would be separate, it would be a separation of powers. That there would be an independent judiciary, that China would gradually move to some form of political reform. What exactly? No one knew, because of course China's locked into being a country under the rule of the four cardinal principles: Communist Party, People's Democratic Dictatorship, and so on and so forth, socialism. Therefore it can't really reform unless it starts to overturn some of its basic principles. And this has been the nub of political debate in China now for these 35, nearly 40 years. Unresolved. It may well remain unresolved for my lifetime. I hope it's resolved in your lifetimes. Who knows? It began in the late Qing dynasty. It began and went on in the early 20th century when there's a whole movement towards constitutionalism, limiting imperial power. And people argued that that political move in 1903-45 is what led to the gradual loosening up of autocratic power, is what led to the collapse of the Qing dynasty. And the communists in 2011, 12, 13, many people in the party argued if we do carry out the kind of political reform that those people said 2009 we should move towards democratization slowly, if we do move towards constitutional rule and limit the party control, will we not undermine our economic reforms just when we need strong leadership? And will we not undermine social cohesion, unity, and the power of the party and the state at this crucial moment? And will that not lead to a collapse? Therefore, let's not discuss this stuff. Nanfang Zhoumo is closed down or reorganized. You can look at our China Story Yearbook 2013. There's a long, detailed account of exactly what happens. I won't go into it now. All I can say is that in the debate about xianzheng, which is not over yet, these same issues occur again and again. And Sun Yat-sen, the leader of the Republican Revolution, the one who always spoke about Zhenxing Zhonghua, revitalizing China. He's the guy who first came out with the slogan as a political leader 115 years ago, Zhenxing Zhonghua. He said China would have to go through 3 phases of political transformation before it could become a strong modern country. He said that China would have to go through a period of strong, unified military control to bring everybody together to maintain, in the face of foreign incursion, oppression, and unequal treaties, this period would be called Junzheng, period of military rule. This would then be followed by a period when China would be stable, it would become a productive society, people's education levels would increase, it would become materially wealthier over time. This would be a period of what they call political tutelage, i.e. there'd be one party rule that would train people to become modern citizens. 训政 is called in Chinese, political tutelage. And then when China had gone through a certain period of modernization, education, enhancement of education, and growth, it could enter a period of what we call 宪政, constitutional rule. Zhou and I made a similar argument in the 1950s. Why don't we have democracy? Too many illiterate people, too diffuse, society is too unstable, too backward. Gradually we'll move towards that because our aim, he said it then, the commies still say it now, the aim is to realize a modern democratic, even if it's socialist, modern democratic free respectful society that treasures human rights. This is still the aim. It's just not yet. And we, i.e. an unelected elite, will decide when it's time. Doesn't, as you know, doesn't usually work like that in real life. But the Xianzheng debate exploded in 2013. It was crushed, with it crushing the hopes of many people for political reform in China. I would point out that I have many friends who still, engage in what I regard as Gorbachev dreaming. Not Chinese dreams, but Gorbachev dreams. They believe, and this is the line, and you'll get this a lot from Chinese friends. I love it, it's so cute. You don't understand. Xi Jinping, a completely enlightened, wise leader. He's worked at every level. He's completely quite unique. He's amassed all this power to himself because only by doing that, and then gradually in the next round of political reform, political change in the next party congress, the 19th Party Congress, he'll be able to get rid of the backward-looking people who were attached to Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao and all these old fuddy-duddy military people. This is part of the anti-corruption campaign has been aimed at that. And then with real power, he'll be able to transition China towards being a more open democratic society. I believe that as much as I believe it's a month consisting of blue moons and Sundays only. Anyway, it's the line you'll be given that Xi Zhuxi, Xi Dada, the great big daddy Xi, is amassing power so he can give up power. Now, that's what I will call unique in Chinese or any history if it happens. I look forward to, as I say, watch this space. Well, you don't need to watch the space. We see what's already happening there. So the Xianzheng debate led to this explosion, crushing of hope, and yet other people, ever hopeful, continued in their wild aberrations and mad dreams. And late last year, this young man was a young man whose name I can't remember at the moment, produced a 6-hour documentary on constitutionalism in China. He's now been arraigned in court. I don't know if he's been given a sentence yet. I think he's been facing 10 years in jail for what I think they called inappropriate business dealings. He made a documentary film we really hate. You can see it on YouTube though, and I think it's just called Xianzheng. Anyway, just look up Xianzheng on YouTube and you can see the full documentary. I'm trying to find it here online. Constitution Day, YouTube. See if it comes up. It's fascinating and it's an argument for China carrying out 百年宪政, 100 years of constitutionalism. That's what it's called. So I suggest you have a look at that. It's a very interesting documentary. Came out last year. The guy's up for very serious prison term. But the debate in China about basic rights, the basic narrative of Chinese history, basic political reform, media responsiveness, internet freedom, independent judiciary, all of these debates continue in China. Xi Jinping and his era have seen them silenced. There's new draconian laws covering the internet and the media, the law, so on and so forth. It doesn't mean the problems have gone away. It doesn't mean anything is resolved. I lived through the Maoist era. I lived through one of the most repressive eras of modern Chinese history. Didn't resolve the problems, didn't silence people, didn't make people give up thinking, didn't change society so it all ended up like everyone were a pack of clones. Doesn't work, I could assure you. Doesn't work. It's fascinating. My Chinese right-thinking Communist Party members always try and re-educate me by telling me I don't really understand China. Well, I do understand one thing that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't understand. It's called human nature. And this is something to a materialist, or somebody who believes in dialectical materialism, they don't believe such a thing exists. Human nature consists merely of those things that result from economic productivity or human interaction with reality. There's no such thing as abstract human value, abstract human ideas, or abstract human goals. These are all socially, politically, and economically determined. It's materialism. I'm not a materialist. So I belong to what they call an extreme idealistic point of view. And all I can say is, over history, if you look at things, I guess that history is more on my side than it is on theirs. Thank you.